All right. Well, it is a Monday, so I don't expect a lot of people to come in. Um, so we'll go ahead and we'll start getting started. I wanted to start off this stream talking about hair loss because it's one of my signature achievements. Well, actually, I guess I would say curing alcoholism and addiction was probably my greatest achievement. But maybe we should talk about that one too. Hair loss is something that I've like figured out how to cure, and I started. I did this like probably uh 7 years ago. But I did it on accident. Like I didn't know that I was doing it at the time. If you've read my book, you'll know my story about having had alcoholism and cancer and a lot of other health problems. And right at the time that I got diagnosed with cancer, I also had my relationship at the time imploded and dissolved, and I embarked on this journey of like trying to get my health back in order. And the stuff that I was doing to treat my cancer inadvertently started making my hair grow back as well. And I realized at the time when I started doing all this research that I could understand the biology behind what was going on. And so I started actually like investigating like why these things were happening. And I eventually figured out what I had done to start reversing my hair loss. Was essentially activating the kynurenine pathway in the localized scalp tissue. And it's really funny because a lot of people sort of in these health circles are aware of my work on curing hair loss, but a lot of them react to it fairly skeptically. Talking, one of the biggest like I guess impediments to them recognizing my accomplishments is they think that activating the kynurenine pathway is overly simplistic. And it's because they don't understand the biology behind what's going on, nor the biology that I explain in my work about what causes hair loss and how to reverse it. And people like that think that you can just take niacinamide and that activates the kynurenine pathway because the end product of the kynurenine pathway is ultimately niacin, and it's made inside of our body from dietary tryptophan. And but that's not how it works at all. Actually, if you take niacin or niacinamide, it actually turns off the kynurenine pathway because the end product of kynurenine pathway is niacin. The body does not want to make excess. There's a feedback mechanism, as there is in many pathways in our body, where what the end product also downregulates the pathway in order to prevent making excess. So you can't just take niacin or niacinamide and actually restore hair. It helps a great deal actually. Like if you are suffering metabolic problems and you use niacinamide as a supplement, it can actually greatly help increase your metabolic rate and your heat production. And a lot of this has to also do with heat distribution throughout the body. But it actually stops the kynurenine pathway. And one of the benefits, actually, so one of the conditions that accompany um, kynurenine pathway downregulation is an increase in tryptophan deposition in tissues. And normally, tryptophan is not stored in our tissues excessively. That happens actually during metabolic disease when your metabolic rate reduces because normally it is catabolized by the kynurenine pathway. So one of the direct benefits of the activating the kynurenine pathway endogenously rather than using niacin or niacinamide is that it catabolizes tryptophan that is accumulating in tissues. And in the last podcast I actually talked about how methionine accumulation in our tissues exposes us to potentially pathogenic infection through sulfate reducing pathogens and microorganisms. And this isn't the kynurenine pathway. This problem isn't related to pathogenic activity so much, but the accumulation of tryptophan in our tissues actually makes our tissues more likely to express torporific hormones that are made from tryptophan. So in tryptophan pathways, the major pathway when you ingest tryptophan, there are two possible major, there's many possible fates for it, but the two major relevant ones to hair loss are either tryptophan gets directed into the torporific hormones, serotonin and melatonin, or it gets directed into the kynurenine pathway, and hopefully if the kynurenine pathway completes, it ends up as niacinamide. And that in turn promotes NAD, which is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which functions as a electron transferring molecule. It basically functions at the intersection where we acquire energy and then use that energy. In that junction, if we don't have NAD, you can't actually, you could eat all the foods you want and you can like raise your metabolic rate, but you can't actually really use that energy. We also have another analog similar that's made out of riboflavin called flavin adenine dinucleotide, which it has similar functions, but NAD is more of the high energy analog of that function. And so the kynurenine pathway though has 9 enzymatic steps, so there are many ways along the pathway that it could actually fail. And so anyway, and a lot of people think of serotonin and melatonin as like healthful hormones, and like they are like no hormone in our body is bad. Like they all serve purposes, and I don't like to characterize any certain hormones as bad. A lot of people do characterize certain hormones as bad, like adrenaline or cortisol or estrogen, and they're not bad. They serve very vital functions, and if you don't have them, you would actually die. They are very necessary, but the problem is when they result in excess or imbalance of those hormones. For instance, one time I had a woman message me for some help, and she was having a really hard time and her health was getting worse. And so I gave her the questionnaire that I give in coaching, and and asked her, what was going on. And she had heard through, other outlets that adrenaline was bad. So she was actually taking a beta inhibitor. Is that what they're called? Where it inhibits adrenaline release. And the problem is that adrenaline actually is responsible for helping to regulate our blood sugar. A little bit of adrenaline expression actually causes a continuous steady stream of glucose release from glycogen storage. And if you don't have enough adrenaline, you don't even release glucose from glycogen storage, so your blood sugar drops. And normally when our glycogen is depleted, and adrenaline starts to rise even higher, trying to squeeze out all that glucose out of your body, out of your glycogen storage as it possibly can, because we need glucose in order to run our metabolic rate. And when we run out of glucose, what then happens is cortisol gets released. And where adrenaline releases glucose from storage, cortisol stimulates tissue catabolism, where our lean protein is catabolized into sugars. Literally, it eats your lean muscle tissue and turns that protein into usable amino acids and sugar so that you don't die. And so what this woman was doing, she was taking a beta blocker. It was blocking her adrenaline release. So even if she was eating plenty of carbohydrate and had adequate glycogen storage, blocking the adrenaline was stopping that glucose from being released. So then what happened is it would immediately trigger cortisol release. And so she was actively promoting tissue catabolism by taking a beta blocker because she had heard that adrenaline was bad. So I got her off of it, told her to stop that immediately, resume eating, carbohydrate and stuff, and that reversed her problem. But anyway, so a lot of people think of serotonin and melatonin as good hormones, like you hear that serotonin is a hormone of happiness. It's not true, actually. This is a mistake in medical research. In the early, throughout the whole history of research on depression and mental health disorders, hormones that promoted, or medicines and treatments that promoted the hormone serotonin appeared to have a therapeutic effect. This was not like confirmed through through test measurements. This was confirmed through observable results in patients. And serotonin produced this effect that appeared to resolve some of the mania behind like manic depressive, back when it was called that, research and effects in people. And so it was just taken that serotonin was the cure for these problems. And this is also why I'm talking about depression and hair loss, because they're actually intimately related to each other. The same conditions that cause depression also cause hair loss. And so, and I'll get into more about that, why, in a little bit. But so because medications that appeared to raise serotonin expression appeared to have therapeutic effect on manic depressives, it was just taken that that was the cure without really like asking if that was why or if there was some other mechanism going on. What's actually going on is that serotonin is one of the hormones of torpor. And if you don't know what torpor means, torpor just basically means to slow processes down. So like, when we're talking about metabolic rate, we've got like a high metabolic rate. We're consuming lots of energy and lots of calories and producing lots of energy, and we feel great and awake and active. Torpor is the opposite of that. Torpor lowers the metabolic rate. And the reason and the function actually of serotonin and melatonin is to lower the metabolic rate of cells, purposefully. We have to have regulatory mechanisms in order to help promote healthy metabolism in our bodies. If it's too much, we can die and have problems, and if it's too little, we can die and have problems. And so we've got lots of these different mechanisms that regulate metabolic rate. And one of the primary functions of serotonin and melatonin in human beings, or not in human beings, sorry, I meant to say in mammals, is that torporific hormones facilitate hibernation. And this originates from our ancient mammalian ancestors who evolved in colder areas of the planet. In warmer areas, we had like big dinosaurs and big predators that were really dangerous. And our little mammalian ancestors evolved in parts of the world that were protected from those big animals in the colder regions. That's one of the reasons why we also developed fur. But because we evolved in these colder regions, like there was periods during the year when there was no food around. So we developed these hibernation response in order to actually survive those periods. And all mammals have hibernation pathways still. So animals that still hibernate today, like bears and do squirrels hibernate? Squirrels, other animals like that hibernate. What happens is when winter starts to approach and the light changes, their bodies start to express higher serotonin and melatonin, and that triggers hibernation responses. And those hormones don't actually stay highly elevated the entire time that they are hibernating. It's like a trigger. A surge comes and it triggers hibernation, and then the levels kind of go back to normal while they're hibernating. And then I forget or didn't ever research what brings them out of it, but that's what torpor is. Torpor is like lowering of the metabolic rate on purpose as a regulatory mechanism. So tryptophan has these two fates. Tryptophan can either be metabolized into NAD, which raises the metabolic rate because of its facilitation of electron transfer and as a cofactor and stuff like that in energy pathways, or it can become a hormone of torpor and lower the metabolic rate. So and when we're talking about hair loss, like this is so and one of the other problems of people who don't understand what I'm talking about when I refer to the kynurenine pathway in hair loss is that this process doesn't just happen the same over the entire body. You've got localized kynurenine pathway activity, like localized to tissues like, your gut or your muscles or your brain or your scalp. And, and people who don't understand biology well enough to understand what I'm talking about will be like, well, you can just take niacinamide or niacin. And no, first of all, like I talked about earlier, that turns off the kynurenine pathway because you're supplying ample amounts of the end product, which is a rate limiting mechanism. that lowers the rate, but then that also promotes tryptophan deposition. And when there's more tryptophan deposition in tissues, then it is more likely to convert into serotonin and melatonin that inhibit the metabolic rate locally. So, and there's a lot of studies that show that tryptophan actually increases in the scalp during aging, and it also actually is, it's also sex dependent too. And age dependent. So like the younger women have the lowest amount of tryptophan in their scalp, and older males have the highest amount of tryptophan in their scalp. There is a direct correlation between age and gender that regulates the kynurenine pathway and the catabolism of tryptophan, and that correlates directly also with hair loss. And one of the reasons that women have lower tryptophan deposition in their scalp is because they express higher amounts of progesterone. And progesterone actually stimulates thyroid activity and thus increased kynurenine pathway activity, actually. And it's one of the primary reasons why women tend to generally not lose their hair the same way as that men do. And oh, and by the way, if you're listening, like you can I also, one of the purposes of this podcast is to answer questions and help people with their health problems. So if you have like questions you want to ask, you can go ahead and start talking about them too, and I'll get to them when I'm finished with this. So anyway, my one track brain already forgot what I was talking about. Oh yeah, progesterone. So progesterone increases the stability of the kynurenine pathway by increasing thyroid activity, and heat, because actually heat is one of the biggest regulators of the kynurenine pathway. If you're cold, it actually lowers the kynurenine pathway activity. And this is a direct function of the kynurenine pathway's relationship to hibernation and the torporific hormones. Because if we're a little mammal living in ice age, and there's snow around, you don't want to be having a high metabolic rate when it's really cold out, because you'll tear through all of your vital nutrients. So the kynurenine pathway is downregulated by heat loss. And the increase in serotonin and synthesis of serotonin and melatonin is actually increased. And this is a mechanism to preserve calories so that you can survive periods when there is, no food around, which tends to happen when you're a little ice age mammal running around in the cold areas of the world. So this still happens in our physiology though. So our physiology is still affected by these evolutionary strategies, but as human beings, and this is what I accidentally said earlier, what I was going to say, as human beings, we actually evolved an anti-hibernation response. So we as human mammals, primates, do not hibernate, obviously. I mean, that seems very obvious, but it's not very obvious. Like, why don't we go into a hibernation slumber like other animals when it gets cold out and when the sun changes, in the sky during the wintertime? Hey, Fortnite kid, nice to see you. It's been a while. I don't remember. Did you show up last stream? I don't think you did. This is my second one of restarting my streams again. I'm really happy to be back. It's nice to see you again. I don't remember much from last stream. Okay, so yeah, so why don't we hibernate? That would be really funny, right? If wintertime came around and like the whole like northern or southern hemispheres, when they're in winter, like the entire human population just like went indoors and just never came out for 3 months. Like, that would be really funny, right? Like, why don't we do that? We are mammals. Lots of mammals hibernate. Why don't we do that? One of the reasons we don't do that is because our evolutionary ancestors, specific to human beings, evolved an anti-hibernation response. And what that hibernation response, anti-hibernation response is that when levels of serotonin and melatonin rise, our body actually increases adrenaline in order to counteract the hibernation impulse. And this is really interesting too, because this is actually one of the reasons why like wintertime actually is kind of exciting. Like, a lot of people look forward to wintertime. I know I do. Like, I love wintertime before it starts. Like, not like Not like 3 months into wintertime, I'm like, fucking get spring here, I'm so tired of this cold crap. But like the onset of winter actually feels really exciting. Oh yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, actually, Fortnite, that's one of the reasons why I am on a little earlier today, because it was also tiring for me too to stream at the end of the day. But I also want to like give other people like around the world like different better opportunities to like come and hang out. So I'm assuming you're somewhere in the east from the US, like Europe or something. Um yeah, I'm going to be doing this regularly though, so I'll be here a lot. So yeah, anyway, uh uh hibernation, um adrenaline. Yeah. So our anti-hibernation response is facilitated by adrenaline. And one of the reasons that like wintertime is often really exciting and thrilling, the onset of the advent of wintertime, is because our hibernation response is trying to kick in because of the change in light availability, and our anti-hibernation response is then kicking in and raising your adrenaline just a little bit, and that little bit of extra adrenaline is really exciting. We've all heard of it, like adrenaline junkies and people like that. And like adrenaline, like and actually one of the greatest stimulants of adrenaline expression is actually interpersonal conflict with other human beings. Like when you get that fight or flight response when someone yells at you and you just get all like uppity and like angry and like just lose your shit at them. Like that's adrenaline. That adrenaline is, but it can be exciting too. Like when you go on like a roller coaster, or you are getting close to a first kiss with a new love interest, like your heart starts racing because that is adrenaline and it feels exciting. And that's also why the advent of winter feels a little bit exciting, because our adrenaline is kicking up a notch in order to prevent our hibernation response. So this also happens in hair loss, because when you and this is also one of the reasons why there's also a correlation with hair loss with people who are perpetually indoors and don't get sunshine. The metaphorical, like, young man living in his parents' basement, early balding, like the one of the reasons why that caricature exists is because having a sunlight deficiency replicates wintertime artificially in our human body. So your hormones of torpor rise because you don't get sun exposure, and then that in turn, okay, and because, okay, so sorry, this stuff is even complicated for me. So I'm sorry, I apologize if you're having a hard time following this, because I am as well. There's a lot involved. So, and this is also one of the other reasons why people don't really understand my work on hair loss, is because, biology is really complicated and a lot of people just want to be able to like take a pill and have it be done with. But the reason those don't work is because they don't operate on the way that our physiology operates. You have to understand the biology behind it if you want to do anything about it. And like, if you don't like reading, and you don't want to learn, then you're fucked, basically. You have to know how this works in order to do anything about it. Not that you have to either. Hair loss is, really just a superficial, egotistical thing. Men look fantastic without hair. I think, and even women, we love a shaved, boss girl. But a lot of the health problems that underlie hair loss, though, are interconnected, like depression. Like we're getting into talking about that, because the pathways, the human body is not a disparate collection of different systems. The human body is one holistic system, and when one thing is wrong, it doesn't just affect one part of your health. It affects lots of different parts of your health, because lots of different parts of our body rely on on similar pathways. So anyway, so when you don't get enough sun exposure, your torporific hormones rise. But it doesn't just happen from sunlight deficiency either. It also happens from caloric deficiency and from, believe it or not, sugar deficiency, because being well fed and having sugar are symptoms of are not symptoms. They're signs of nutrient availability in the environment. Sugar is only produced by plants when there's plenty of sunshine out. Fruit is only produced by plants during the availability of sun and water. And so like the lack of sugar in the diet, uh because that mimics wintertime, actually, because there's no fruit available during times of winter time, of famine, during like the winter or like droughts and stuff like that. So having deficiencies of calories and sugar and things that raise your metabolic rate automatically promote an increase in torporific hormones as a mechanism to spare nutrients in your body. But when you get we're getting a sunlight deficiency, or we're getting caloric deficiency, and other nutrient deficiencies, because you also need certain nutrients. Actually, sugar is also involved in the kynurenine pathway. There are fructose phosphatase enzymes that, I think it's fructose phosphatase, that the kynurenine pathway. Remember, it's a 9-step enzymatic process. There are many places along the kynurenine pathway that it can actually fail. So so there are many points of possible failure. So you have these nutrient deficiencies, or you have sunlight deficiencies, your torporific hormones rise. Not only does it lower your metabolic rate, which inherently cuts off the activity of the kynurenine pathway anyway, but the concomitant rise in stress hormones like adrenaline, and then cortisol also follows adrenaline, actually cut off blood supply to the peripheral tissues, including the scalp. Because guess what? That's a big source of heat loss. Because remember, the torporific hormones are designed in our physiology to help us survive times when we have reduced nutrient availability, including times when it's cold out. But not just, it doesn't have to be cold out though. When your metabolic rate drops, your heat production also drops. So the body's and the interior of our body is around 99, almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit inside. And that's really, really hot. And it needs to be that hot in order for our cells to function properly. I mentioned last stream that we often consider, like, if the outside temperature reaches 94 Fahrenheit, that is very sweltering to a lot of people. But if your internal core drops below 94 Fahrenheit, you will go into a coma. That's how important heat is for our mammalian physiology to function properly. So anyway, when you have a rise in torporific hormones and a concomitant rise in adrenaline, one of the functions of adrenaline is to cut off peripheral blood flow, because you need to retain blood flow to the internal organs and cut off a potential source of heat loss by blood circulating through the skin. So that ends up cutting off blood supply to the scalp. And remember, this is all a function of the kynurenine pathway as well. Well, it's blocking the kynurenine pathway, these stress hormones, because the kynurenine pathway helps to facilitate NAD, which helps to facilitate a high metabolic rate. And during times of torpor and stress, your body lowers that metabolic function in order to preserve calories and nutrients and prevent heat loss. So this is cutting off blood supply to the scalp. There's another factor though that's sort of separate but kind of also related. Certain fatty acids. Okay, so actually, I guess it's not separate. It's actually directly related. Fatty acids in our all over our body. There's lots of different fatty acids. There's saturated fatty acids. There's monounsaturated fatty acids. There's polyunsaturated fatty acids. They perform all sorts of functions. They perform structural functions. They perform regulatory functions. They perform nutrient functions. In our skin, there's a lot of fat in our skin. Actually, it's one of the reasons why skin is like supple and resistant to dehydration and stuff, is because of fatty acids. But I make this analogy a lot. So the difference between like saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids is their response to environmental temperature. So butter is a great example. Butter in the fridge is solid because it's made out of mostly saturated fatty acids or monounsaturated fatty acids. So in lower temperature, it becomes stiff. polyunsaturated fats have lots of unsaturated bonds, so in lower temperature they stay liquid. You can put like olive oil, for instance, in the well, actually it stiffens a little bit, but if you put like canola oil. Hi Todd. Welcome. Oh, hey Jay too. Nice to see you guys. Oh, good. Yeah. Glad you got the book update. I'm gonna be having another update actually soon, in probably like a month-ish or so. So keep an eye out for that. Still, it'll still, even though you just got this update, this one will have important information. But yeah, welcome guys. We're talking about hair loss and depression and how they're connected actually. Okay, so fatty acids in our skin. So if you were to refrigerate canola oil, it would stay liquid. Fish, for instance, have lots of unsaturated fat in them, actually fish oil. And it's because they live in a veritable refrigerator. Like if fish were made out of saturated fatty acids, they would just turn to a solid stick of butter and be literally unable to move. So our body has different ways of regulating these factors in our body. So in the skin is always several degrees cooler than the core of the body. And so it's not, and because of that, it's not really good. Hey, Mike. So it's our skin is not really good at hosting saturated fats because it's lower temperature. The saturated fats turn solid, and they literally become unable to move through cell membranes and other cellular structures, and they literally clog up the cell. This is actually a problem. There are certain conditions. I always forget what it's called, but it's like a sty. Is it called? It's not a sty. It starts with a C. It's this a chelation, I think. Where you get like a little growth or bump on your eyelids. And I've helped people resolve this before. I want to look up the name of this actually, because chelation. Yeah, chelation, yeah. Small lump or cyst in the eyelid. So a chelation. And it's really funny too, because doctors don't even know what this is. Like I literally, somebody came to me who needed help. Their doctor was not able to help them. They had this like cyst growing in their eyelid and they couldn't get rid of it. But because I like know more about biology than pretty much any doctor on the planet, knew that this was a dysfunction of desaturase enzymes and a buildup of saturated fats in the eyelid actually. Because the skin, our peripheral tissues are quite colder than the interior of our body, and saturated and the body needs to be able to desaturate those fats in order to actually use those fats in the metabolism of the skin and other colder peripheral tissues. So, and desaturase enzymes do that. They desaturate fatty acids actually, and they are zinc dependent. So I knew this person was, because of the symptom, I knew they were zinc deficient. So I got them on zinc, and then I had them put a hot compress on their eye like 2 or 3 times a day for a few weeks. And it went away finally, in just like 2 weeks, it went away. So this happens in our scalp. So if you are, losing hair, what part of the problem is, okay, so we covered lowering the lower metabolic rate and the function of torporific hormones, and then adrenaline, our anti-hibernation response, cutting off circulation to the scalp. That in turn further reduces the temperature of the scalp. And this is actually one other reason why women are less prone to hair loss, is because women's have more subcutaneous fat. Their skin stays warmer actually than men's skin. This is actually one of the primary causes of hair loss, but you can't just like apply a warm compress to your head and get hair to grow back, because it doesn't work that easily, unfortunately. But okay, so the temperature in the scalp is reduced, so you have higher desaturase enzyme activity. And the fatty acids that are in the skin are relevant to the antagonistic effect to or pro-growth hair for hair stuff, because we have a unique fatty acid in our skin called sapienic acid. No other animal on the planet has this fatty acid in their body. humans are the only ones that have it, and it plays a role in sebum and acne and stuff like that. Sapienic acid. So the target of desaturated enzymes is usually um, oleic acid and palmitic acid. And when those are in the skin, the desaturated enzymes will make sapienic acid, which is really healthy for our skin. But if you have an excess of linoleic or linoleic, or wait, what's the other one that sounds like linoleic? If you have if you have high polyunsaturated fats in your skin already, the desaturated enzymes will instead, because it's not super specific. It just will desaturate any like saturated, not saturated. It will desaturate any fats that are in the skin when the temperature drops in order to facilitate movement of those fatty acids through the cells. So if you have a diet high in polyunsaturated fats, it will further desaturate those polyunsaturated fats into even more unsaturated fats. This is a big problem because the most unsaturated fats actually stop the kynurenine pathway. EPA, DHA, and arachidonic acid very, very powerfully stop the kynurenine pathway. And believe it or not, it gets even more complicated because when the kynurenine pathway gets stopped at certain points, it actually results in highly cytotoxic byproducts. One of them is specifically called quinolinic acid. And the reason that these are cytotoxic and neurotoxic is because they are sort of a backup method for our body to try to stimulate cellular activity during metabolic stress. They stimulate cells. They force them to exert themselves, and it's like a defibrillator kind of, or something. It's like this is going wrong, we need to like get things moving again. So this acid, so because we couldn't make kynurenine, we couldn't make NAD, we're going to make quinolinic acid to try to force you to be active. And quinolinic acid is one of the reasons too why hair loss is often associated with mania and psychological problems. You often see, like, I like to make the analogy of the subject of excuse me, I need some water. What was that movie? I forgot. It's that movie with Russell Crowe where he's like, is it even Russell Crowe? I don't know if I'm getting that right. A Beautiful Mind. A lot of people, as older guys, but also women too, who have psychological problems, will often present with hair loss, and the reason is because the interruption of the kynurenine pathway due to nutritional deficiencies, sunlight deficiency, promotes excessive quinolinic acid. And that in turn, and it doesn't just happen like on the scalp, it happens all over your body. And in the brain, quinolinic acid is highly stimulates your cognition, which is good in the short term, but when it's chronic, it causes mental deterioration. This is actually also an evolutionary, and remember, like, none of this information is like, accepted science. This is all my own work. So, do with it as you will. But one of the reasons that we have this pathway is because when there were nutritional deficiencies in our environment as an evolutionary animal, we needed to have an increase in our creative problem solving skills. If you lived in an area that became depleted of nutrients and you started to starve, this is a mechanism to make you smarter so that you go, oh, let's go look for some new, resources. Or like let's go explore and try to find new things. Like this was a way for our biology to increase our cognitive capacity so that we were better creative problem solving. Yes, Todd. Yeah. Saturated fat is really good because saturated fat promotes the kynurenine pathway. And yes, and then having zinc in the diet allows our body to make derivatives of those saturated fats. So, for instance, palmitic acid can be desaturated into oleic acid, which is a monounsaturated fat, which is very healthy for us. And then after oleic acid, though, you then start to get to other more unsaturated fats, like linoleic acid. But those aren't always bad either. So desaturating fats is also one of the mechanisms by which our body gets rid of fats. So like because of the same problems, like most of our body is made out of water, and really saturated fats are really hydrophobic. So the further though you desaturate them, the less hydrophobic they are. And so what the body does is our body will desaturate fats as far as it can, and then it will sulfate them, and then it will excrete them in the feces to get rid of fats that it doesn't want. This is actually one of the pathways by which you can lose weight and shed fat without dieting. If you have enough dietary sulfur and sugar, it actually stimulates, it just makes your liver detoxify fats, and you poop them out. But if you don't have enough dietary sulfur, that actually pathway will result in a fatty liver. That's where actually fatty liver comes from. So but yeah, so zinc is like, really important for that reason. But if your diet is all polyunsaturated fats, then you don't have enough saturated fats to dilute the polyunsaturated fats, and then the polyunsaturated fats will actually inhibit the kynurenine pathway and result in things like quinolinic acid production. So quinolinic acid is a neurostimulant, and it can increase, and this is actually one of the reasons why like nerdy people and really smart people tend to also not be like, buff athletes. And you like the divergence of the kynurenine pathway, or the failure of the kynurenine pathway to complete, is responsible for the stereotype of the jock versus nerd dichotomy of our societies. It's actually biological, it's not social. um People who are very physically fit and active and have well developed bodies have a diet and lifestyle that promotes completion of the kynurenine pathway. And nerdy people like me, other nerds, and really smart people have diets and environments that inhibit the kynurenine pathway from completing, and also at the point that promotes more quinolinic acid production, because quinolinic acid is neurostimulatory. And but then the problem is, and one of the reasons too why I had like lifelong depression, it was suicidal depression and stuff like that, was because of the stress of my environment. While it did make me more intelligent, which can be achieved through healthier ways too, mind you, you don't have to promote quinolinic acid to do this. This is just a stress pathway for this. Over a long period of time, causes neurodegeneration and exhausts and promotes high stress hormones and exhausts nutrient stores, and so anyway, but this is also relevant for hair loss, because when you have sugar deficiency, high trophic hormones, high stress hormones, and it interrupts the kynurenine pathway, it increases quinolinic acid production, which overstresses cells and exhausts them, and then they don't have the nutrients to grow hair. So in fact, male pattern hair loss follows the pattern of the neurological structure of the scalp. If you look at a map of the nerves of a human scalp, the nerve pathways go exactly in the direction of the hair loss. And you can see the pattern, the progression progresses directly along the direction of the nerve cells. And that's because the nerve cells are being stimulated by the quinolinic acid production resulting from insufficient kynurenine pathway activity that is overstressing the cells, which is a result of the high polyunsaturated fat diet, causing high production of even more unsaturated fat production through the desaturase enzymes in your skin. Which and yeah, and anyway, and so doing the reverse, and this is why the people who like sort of like, you know, dismiss my, you know, explanation as the kynurenine pathway as the cause of hair loss have no fucking idea what they're talking about, because it's taken me an hour to just explain this basic science of what's going on here. Hey Lou. And why it is really complex, and it's not the same thing as just taking niacinamide as a supplement. That's not even remotely related to this. So anyway, so that's what causes hair loss. So reversing that, and I talk about this in my book of how to reverse it, you know, which if I got into it right now, it would take another hour. But it basically just involves like eating good saturated fats, good protein, good carbohydrates, sugar, getting sun exposure, and all those things that raise the kynurenine pathway activity. And I wanted to also talk about why this is also related to depression, because they're very, very much related. Because we've got this situation where we have sunlight deficiency and we have sugar deficiency and we have nutrient deficiency, and that's raising your torporific hormones and raising your stress hormones, cutting off blood circulation to your periphery. And by periphery, I also mean like the penis. Because that's one of the reasons why stress like inhibits like libido, is because of these kinds of ways in which they interrupt really important pathways that a lot of our body functions rely on. And it's really funny too, because you got people, you know, dieting and starving themselves, and like, you know, intermediate personalities, and I'm talking about this too because, like, you know, certain streamers that I watch will be on stream and they'll talk about how they're having a really hard time losing weight, or they're losing their hair, or they're feeling really depressed. And then they go on and promote calorie deprivation and excessive exercise and all of these other destructive dietary behaviors that are causing the very things that they're suffering from. And they don't see the connection. And it gets really frustrating because I'm like, you know, raising my hand here, like, hey, like, I know what's happening to you. Like you're causing this actually by doing these destructive dietary behaviors. And there's also pathogenic infection angles, but that's for a different stream. And, you know, like, you know, pick on me, like here. But anyway, okay. So, but the reason that this contributes to depression is because right at that conjunction where you got rise in torporific hormones and you start to express adrenaline, for those same reasons, for sunlight deprivation, for nutrient deprivation, for avoiding sugar, all those things, you know, promote stress hormones. And earlier, you know, and I was talking earlier about the function of serotonin and melatonin, where people think that they are involved in happiness and depression, and they are, but for the opposite reasons that most people think. The opposite of depression is not happiness; it's actually vitality. And I first heard that from what's his name? I can't remember. I mentioned him in my book, Andrew something. He's great. I can't remember his name right now. Not being depressed does not mean being happy. It means having energy. It means having vitality, having the energy and the wellness to feel good. And because serotonin and melatonin induce torpor, those are not the solution to depression. And it's actually one of the reasons why a lot of serotonin regulating antidepressants also come with an increased risk of suicide, which is the most insane thing. And I can't believe that like these words actually even come out of my mouth, that researchers and medical professionals do not see the disparity between those two things. If serotonin medications cure depression, why the fuck do they come with an increased risk of suicide? The reason that they do is because they are not the cure for depression. They just increase torpor, and so that anesthetizes the person, and it can reduce some symptoms of depression like mania and stuff like that. But this is also why a lot of antidepressants induce erectile dysfunction and have a lot of other really debilitating side effects, is because they are promoting even more depression, even more torpor. And what is our body's response to that torpor? It's to increase adrenaline. And one of the reasons, and the real the actual real cure for depression is dopamine. And this is also really easy for people to understand. When like I really Andrew Solomon, no, is it Andrew Solomon? Yeah, Todd. Uh, yeah, it is Andrew Solomon. Thank you for that. I'll get your other things on sulfur and vitamin E. I said, I can't believe it's already been an hour. I've just been talking straight. Okay, so adrenaline, depression. When one time I was on a stream with a small streamer, they probably had like 50 people, and they were gamer and they were really cute and gay. And after like I followed them for like a month and was really enjoying their content. And they started talking about their depression like all the time, like how bad their depression was, and like, you know, and I was like, oh hey, like I can actually help you with that. Like I actually have a lot of experience with depression. I know what causes it. I was like, a lot of people think that it's serotonin and melatonin, but it's not. It's actually dopamine. And then they like this person and their friends and other people in the chat all got up on me, and they started talking like they knew what the fuck they were talking about. And they were saying things like, "Oh, isn't it like, you know, a deficiency of receptors? Yeah, I think it's like a deficiency of receptors." And they don't even know what the fuck a receptor is, which is why they're talking like that. like, like people just for some reason have this idea that they know about biology when they have never even fucking spent 10 minutes studying biology, and it's absolutely nuts. But that's why this is why people cannot also comprehend how serotonin participates in happiness, because it doesn't. There's no function of serotonin that is involved with anything that's related to vitality and energy. It does the opposite, and that's why people are hard pressed, including researchers and medical professionals, are hard pressed to explain how it works, because there is no mechanism for it working. Dopamine, on the other hand, everyone understands. Dopamine is often vilified as the hormone of reward because we have a lot of like, you know, really self-shaming and shaming and guilt problems in our contemporary societies that result from the last several thousand years of religious desiccation of the body, but that's an entire different subject. But dopamine, you know, people associate dopamine with rewarding behaviors, you know, sex, food, risk-taking. But that's the vilification of dopamine. Dopamine is not bad. Is not the purpose of dopamine is actually to help a human, and well, not just humans, because other mammals have it, but is to help social animals understand the behaviors that promote success. That's it. As a human being, we need certain things to be healthy and satisfied in life. We need companionship, we need food, we need shelter, we need opportunity and accomplishment, social togetherness, you know, relationships, sex, love. All of those things promote dopamine. People talk about, especially medical professionals, especially psychologists, will often talk about dopamine in terms of risk taking. But like, you get fucking dopamine from like finishing your homework. Like when you finish your homework and you're done, that is a dopamine rush. Like dopamine. So like, why aren't they concerned with like people doing too much homework? You know, like you shouldn't be doing your homework. Like, you know, you'll get a dopamine rush, like, you know, or you get a dopamine rush from eating like really good food, or like, you know, talking to somebody that you really like. Kissing somebody, you know, gives you a huge dopamine rush, and also oxytocin, but that's like a different thing. And like, so dopamine is happiness. Like that is what happiness is. Happiness comes from having an environment that is satisfying and reduces your stress hormones and raises your dopamine levels. And yeah, well actually, so Lou, yeah, so like gaming is often also talked about in a negative way with like dopamine rushes, because you get dopamine from playing video games. But again, like, you know, we get dopamine from eating food and doing homework and having accomplishments, getting a new job, like being good at that job. Like, you know, all of these things, dopamine is a feedback mechanism that facilitates our instincts so that we know as a human being what is successful, what promotes our well-being. And if you get enough well-being, then you are happy, and dopamine facilitates that. It's a feedback mechanism. If we didn't have dopamine, we wouldn't get feedback from our environment and choices, and we would just be in a vegetative state, and we would fail to thrive as a species. So anyway, guess what adrenaline is made out of? And remember, I talked about how adrenaline rises when you're stressed and when you have low blood sugar and when you have a sunlight deficiency. Adrenaline is made from dopamine. And this is another reason too why serotonin can't explain depression, because it doesn't deplete anything that is vital for our vitality. It down regulates our metabolic rate, but it doesn't really steal anything. But adrenaline steals dopamine. It's literally made from dopamine. And it's also one of the reasons why adrenaline is so exciting, because they're related substances. So dopamine is made from tyrosine, which is from the diet, but can also be made from phenylalanine. And there's an intermediate in there for L-dopa. Adrenaline is like an amped up version of dopamine. Like dopamine makes us feel really nice, but then adrenaline like increases it. Like it gives that little extra oomph. It also promotes glucose release and stuff like that that gives you energy. And that's why they have similar feelings, because they are related compounds. So if happiness is facilitated through dopamine, which also, by the way, is why people abuse drugs and alcohol, because drugs and alcohol promote dopamine. So you can hack that system. And that's why it's therapeutic for drug abusers and alcoholics like myself used to be, to use those substances, because it helps promote dopamine when you are deficient in dopamine. And that's why they are addictive. But if you have enough stress in your life and you don't eat enough food, you're calorie deficient, you're protein deficient, you don't get enough sunshine, your stress hormones rise, you express so much adrenaline that you deplete your dopamine and tyrosine and phenylalanine stores. And then and any dopamine that you might make gets shuffled immediately over into adrenaline. So, and this is why hair loss and depression are often so interconnected, why they present at the same time, because they are both caused by excess of stress hormones that are induced by the state of torpor, by serotonin and melatonin, by sunlight deficiency and nutrient deficiency and sugar deficiency and all of that jazz. And this is also one of the reasons why like depression often accompanies tumultuous childhoods, like when you grow up at the really like volatile a situation as a kid, because your chronic expression of adrenaline, because of the stress that you grew up with, chronically has depleted you of dopamine and tyrosine and phenylalanine. So then those other pathways, and this is all, and actually too, like so this is also why stress promotes illness as well, because tyrosine is not only needed for dopamine and adrenaline, it's also actually in a lot of immune pathways. Our entire peroxidase innate immune system relies on tyrosine, and our iron sequestration strategies like transferrin and other lactoferrin, other iron sequestration strategies are also made out of tyrosine. There's others too, but I just can't remember them off the top of my head right now. But so you get depleted. So the high stress hormones deplete that tyrosine stores, then those pathways also suffer, making you more susceptible to infection and illness. It's one of the reasons why I have had such a problem with infection and illness throughout my life, is because my childhood growing up gay in a conservative community was so insanely stressful that it just completely wrecked all of my endocrine system and my immune system and just made me fucking miserable. And that's why people get to a point where they become suicidal too, because the pain and the consequences of that become so unbearable that there's just like your life is just one constant like painful experience. And so so that's why they're related. And so doing the reverse, like and I go into depth in my book about this kind of stuff, eating properly, how to regulate these mechanisms, what you need to get the certain amount you need at least 2 hours of direct sunlight exposure a day to regulate these symptoms. And most of us are not getting that. I'll be honest, I'm not getting that right now. I only kind of get about an hour a day, but that's still better than nothing. But that's not to say that you need to get sunburn either, because we just need direct sunlight, because glass and like this apartment I live in actually has kind of tinted glass windows, like they're kind of a green color. And a lot of new construction is like that because they think it's going to lower the heat transfer inside, and it doesn't. It just blocks like bright light. So you get even more of a light deficiency indoors than you would have because of these modern materials. So, getting outside, eating plenty of calories, eating plenty of sugar. Of course, a lot of people are worried that that kind of stuff will make them gain weight, but that's not what causes weight gain. And that's a whole other topic for another stream. But my book goes into it. So anyway, that was a really long diatribe. That was an hour and 5 minutes I spent talking about hair loss and depression. So anyway, we'll move on to the question and answer portion of the blog, of the not blog, of the stream. If you guys have questions, I see Mike, you asked a while ago, you stopped taking Now Foods vitamin E almost daily. Oh, actually, no, Todd, you asked what are go-to foods for sulfur. Okay, so sulfur we get from protein, methionine and cysteine in the transsulfuration pathway, but those actually require the B vitamins B6, B9, and B12 to prevent excess methionine buildup. And I don't talk about this in my book yet. It's coming in my update. My entire last stream had a lot of information about hydrogen sulfide. Excess methionine buildup can actually make you susceptible to sulfate-reducing pathogen infection. So it's actually a problem. Like if you have like halitosis, like those are hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria, and you get them because of excess methionine buildup in your body because of deficiencies in dietary B vitamins. Because if you have a diet high in animal products, they kind of tend to be low in folate, and some products have some pyridoxine, but not like plants do. So you can actually get an excess of those. But other sulfur foods are like I love broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Those are good sulfur foods. Onions and garlic, those can give you sulfur too. Yeah. But if you have sulfate reducing bacteria, you need to mitigate those as well. And one of the easiest or most effective ways to do that, besides just cutting back a little bit on your methionine and cysteine intake, is to eat a whole bunch of foods high in anthocyanin, which are the dark colored pigments in berries like blackberries and purple grapes and strawberries and raspberries. Those help to block and mitigate hydrogen sulfide activity. So but that's not in my book yet. It's actually in the version of the book that's online right now. So but it's not finished yet. I always upload my drafts to the product page so that people get my latest work, but it's not finished yet. So if you have a code for downloading the book, you can go because you bought it earlier. You can go get a new copy there and get that info, or you can wait till I release the update officially. Okay, sorry. And so Mike, you asked, you stopped taking Now Foods vitamin E. Powerful dreams recall. Could the connection be the vitamin E helps absorb glycogen? Wait, you stopped taking it and you started having better dreams? I don't really know actually about vitamin E's roles in glycogen. I've never researched that at all. And I'm not sure why it would affect your dreams. I've had moments like that too. Actually, when I was really ill, I had nightmares a lot, but there was a period when I like stopped dreaming, and when I fixed my diet and got better, my dreams came back. Hi Atticus, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad to be back too. But I'm not really sure how vitamin E would work in there. Vitamin E is a really powerful aromatase inhibitor. And because estrogen is involved in pathways of growth and regeneration, it could probably have something to do with that, but I don't know specifically. But you also asked if vitamin E and A are stored in fat, then they could be detrimental when released once during illness and continue hyperpigmentation. No, our body isn't really too susceptible to that. Actually, Mike, I remember last stream you did ask a question about someone who said that they were toxic. That person does not know what they're talking about. Actually, well, kind of. So there is sort of this trend to vilify vitamin A in certain circles. It's totally fucking insane because vitamin A is required as a cofactor for steroidogenesis. So if you avoid vitamin A, you can actually cause yourself to be like hypogonad and stuff like that. Um, uh, there are studies that show toxic effects of vitamin A, but they're from supplemental vitamin A, not dietary vitamin A, and there's a big important distinction between those two things. And I talk about this emphatically in my book too. Supplemental vitamin A and supplemental carotenes can be toxic because vitamin A and carotenes are actually unsaturated and they're susceptible to oxidative damage. That's actually part of their function as an antioxidant, is to accept oxidative oxidation and peroxidation. They work especially in fat oxidation, so peroxidation and peroxidation pathways. So when you're making them as a supplement, they can become oxidized. And so when you then supplement those things, they don't perform as antioxidants in your body anymore because they were oxidized during the manufacturing process. Also, vitamin A is one of the strongest stimulants of iron release. It's actually a regulator of hepcidin, which is a signaling hormone that promotes iron. Can't remember actually which way it works. It either promotes iron storage or release. I can't remember which one it is. But vitamin A reverses the storage. So if you take vitamin A, it actually stimulates iron release. And if you take too much of it, you can stimulate massive iron release. And then you get all this circulating iron that oxidizes your tissues and causes a lot of problems. So that's another way that vitamin A can actually be toxic as a supplement. But this doesn't happen. And I also don't like, a lot of people are really jazzed about taking liver, and I just don't like it. It's one of the most bioavailable, highest sources of iron. Iron excess causes so many metabolic problems. That's one of the reasons why it tastes fucking gross. And don't get me wrong, like I like a good chopped liver every once in a while is really yummy, but too much of it, like the reason your tongue goes like this is kind of gross, is because of its exceptionally high iron content. And while it has a lot of other vitamins in it, it's not really good for you to eat because of the exceptionally high. Not only is it high in iron, the kind of iron that it has, the heme iron, is very highly bioavailable too. So you absorb a whole lot of it. There was some idiot on my social media pages a while ago who said that they got mad at me for posting a picture of my spinach. They said they don't eat spinach because it's really high in iron. Well, buddy, the liver you're eating is way higher in iron, and that iron is also more bioavailable. The iron in plants is not very bioavailable, so your body actually has a hard time absorbing most of the iron that is in plants anyway. But anyway, so vitamin A can be toxic as a supplement for that reason. And then a lot of researchers or health advocates and nutritionist people have kind of gotten on this idea that vitamin A then is toxic because of these studies that are show it being toxic. But dietary carotene is not toxic. It's really healthy for us. It's required as an antioxidant in our body. It actually protects our gut mucosal lining from pathogenic bacteria and oxidative stress. It's very vital for our diet. And then vitamin E also is very often delivered as a supplement, and vitamin E is synthetic too. Most supplements, sorry, I totally said that wrong. That is not what I meant. Vitamin E is very often a synthetic supplement, and the synthetic vitamin E's are often shown to be toxic actually themselves. Vitamin E is actually usually a complex mixture in nature of several different versions of vitamin E, of tocopherols and tocotrienols. And there's some evidence that tocotrienols aren't actually very good for us, but tocopherols are. And so supplemental vitamin E in studies is usually synthetic vitamin E, and it's a very specific type, and it's also toxic. So this is where these people fail in their viewpoints, I guess, or stance on this stuff, is that they're referencing studies on synthetics and supplements, and that is not the same at all of dietary sources. So in my recommendations, I often tell people to only use, if they're using a vitamin E supplement, to only use natural sources of vitamin E from a good source, and don't do soy sourced vitamin E either. I don't know why, but I just haven't not seen the results from soy based vitamin E that I have from like sunflower vitamin E, for instance. So anyway, yeah. So there's just this disconnect between the supplemental and artificial synthetic sources, and then they're extrapolating that to dietary sources as well. So and vitamin E is crucial for our healthy function in our body, especially inhibiting aromatase and especially inhibiting fatty acid, fat peroxidation as well, and getting those from nutritional sources. For instance, if you sprout seeds and nuts, it actually increases their vitamin E content up to 600%. They literally, like, sprouted nuts and seeds become a vitamin E supplement. And especially for healthy people, you don't need to supplement vitamin E. If you're eating regular nuts intake, or even like sprouted spelt flour, spelt is a seed. So if you're sprouting spelt or eating sprouted spelt flour, you're actually getting a pretty high dose of vitamin E in your food. So, oh, I need another drink. Okay. You guys talking about gamers. I think it's more about being a normie. You're not really open ideas, contrary to your world. Yeah. Actually, that's also often a symptom of like younger people, because, like, when you're like a kid and your entire worldview is centered around yourself and your parents and your entire world, like your parents, like every waking moment is all about you and feeding you and clothing you and getting you to do your homework. And then and then gaming, like, is kind of a way that you start to get exposed to the wider world. But then you suddenly are meeting other children that also are used to, like, having their view of the world centered on themselves, and that is inherently in conflict. Many young people have lots of interpersonal conflict when they go off to college, because it's their first interaction with other children who are also babied and by their parents, and they're used to having the entire world, and it becomes a really rude awakening. And they're forced to come to terms with the fact that we're actually not that important as an individual to everybody else. But yeah, but that yeah, and that can translate over into like ideology, especially, and it's really ironic when it translates over to biology and health issues, because, like, biology and health is finite. Like, it's not, you can't, it's not open to interpretation. Like, our biology only works a certain way. And you need to understand as best we can how that works if we're to be effective in our health problems. It's why, like, those kids, yeah, that I was talking with on streaming, all thought that they were authorities on serotonin receptors. Like, what the fuck? Like, literally, like, you guys have absolutely no experience with science at all. Like, how do you think that you can have an opinion on how the body works? Like, that's not how it works. You have to understand and learn how the body works. So, yeah, anyway. Mike, have I ever thought about doing an audiobook version of my book? Oh, thank you. That's nice of you to say. You pay for an audiobook version. I've had people ask that. It seems like a monumentous undertaking that I am not equipped to actually do myself. And also, I work on my book and make changes so much that I would have to wait till my book is finished for that. And I don't know, lots of excuses. I'll probably do it sometime in the future. It definitely won't be something soon, though, that I do. So mostly too, because I'm still working on my book. Like, I mean, you guys can buy it. Like, if you haven't before, my book is available for sale. It has a lot of information on it, but it is an ongoing work where I continually am researching new things and updating it. And I have a really big update coming soon on hydrogen sulfide and its effect on our immune system. So stuff like that. Mike, if methionine and cysteine restriction increase longevity by triggering increase in sulfur, then would a supplement of sulfur have a similar longevity promotion? No. So Mike, methionine and cysteine are very specific forms of sulfur where they have an amino group attached, right? Which is why they're amino acids. And the amino acid part of the sulfur molecule is relevant to their function, which is why we can't synthesize them ourselves. I mean, we can make cysteine from methionine, but and so like this also becomes confusing a lot when you see nutritional information where sources will say that cysteine is not an essential amino acid. That's really wrong and misleading, because it is, because we can't de novo synthesize cysteine. We can make cysteine from methionine, but that doesn't mean that we can just like make cysteine out of carbon and oxygen and hydrogen like bacteria do. We have to have the substrate. So cysteine is not really non-essential. It actually is essential, and it comes from methionine. And that distinction, causes people a lot of problems when they're trying to figure out how things. But anyway, but because they are part of amino acids, they're very different than non-amino acid sources of sulfur. We need these in order to make certain molecules in our body that are dependent on them. A lot of enzymes have cysteine residues that are relevant to their function and things like that are not replicated by sulfur. But other dietary sources of sulfur, like what's in brassicas and garlic and onions, is also used in our body for other purposes that use sulfur. And also too, like there's also probably a pathway. I saw a scientist hypothesize about this a while ago, and I mentioned it in my book, where other dietary forms of sulfur, like from brassicas and garlic and onions and stuff like that, is actually converted into sulfate in the skin under the influence of sunlight exposure. That's like an example of those various pathways. So like normal sulfur and like a supplement of sulfur would not do the same thing as methionine. Sorry, I'm confusing two things that we said, which is also relevant actually for an issue that I have. So there are studies that show that methionine and cysteine restriction increases longevity, but if you abstain from methionine and cysteine excessively, you will also die early because it is vital for very, very many important functions in our body. And the restriction studies of those are usually done on things like worms or mice. Excuse me. So, wow, I can't believe I went that long without coughing, actually. So, I have cystic fibrosis, if you guys didn't know, which has gotten better because of my recent work. I used to actually have this symptom. I used to actually like wake up. It was really, really bad when I was really sick and had cancer, but it got better, but it didn't go away for a long time. And I had this thing where I would probably like maybe every other day, or maybe kind of, if I took a nap, it maybe would happen once a day, but it was kind of like on average every other day. I would just randomly wake up from a nap or sleeping and start coughing. And when I was really sick, the fits would last for hours, but now it would only last for like 30 seconds and then I'd be done. But that stopped, which was really good. But I still cough when I talk for too long sometimes. Yeah, okay. So methionine and cysteine restriction in excess is actually really harmful. We need methionine and cysteine for tissue regeneration and detoxification and enzyme functions. And the reason that restriction helps to increase longevity is because the excess causes hyperhomocystemia, and homocysteine is highly activating, but it also makes us susceptible to hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria. And so the restriction helps to promote health through those pathways, but doing it in excess is equally harmful. So it's not like you can replace them or avoid them in excess and expect to have good health, because it won't work that way at all. The more effective ways to deal with problems of methionine and cysteine, which are mostly related to hydrogen sulfide, is to not to restrict them excessively, but instead to eat ample and generous quantities of foods high in anthocyanin, like berries and stuff like that, because anthocyanin helps to inhibit hydrogen sulfide. And so then that mitigates the effects of methionine and cysteine because it's not possible to avoid them entirely without experiencing detrimental health effects. So yeah, and so a supplement of sulfur doesn't replace the restriction of those because they have different functions. So unfortunately not. Lou, have I heard of Buteyko? Yeah, I tried it once. I don't mean once as in one time, but like a long time ago. You discovered how your shallow breathing was lately and have been experimenting with fuller exhales. Seems to reliably improve circulation. Okay, so Lou, so there's nothing wrong with those practices, but they will not work to solve the shallow breathing in the long term. And I am also speaking from experience. When I first started all this stuff and I first found repeat communities and things like that, I saw those messages posted on forums about breathing problems and Buteyko and CO2 and all that stuff. And my breathing was really bad. Like I literally felt like I was suffocating in the air. Like I felt like I was drowning in the air. Like I could not breathe. I could not get air into my lungs. It was so scary and it was really stressful. And I tried bag breathing and I tried Buteyko breathing. It would work when I did it, but it would not do anything for me when I was not doing it. So doing that can do things like increase oxygenation into your tissues, but it really only works while you're doing it. And because it's not possible to do it all the time, it doesn't really help long-term with your health problems. Shallow breathing, and this is also the holy grail of all of that stuff. All these people on these forums are like doing things. I think I heard of a guy, I don't know if this is true or not, but I think somebody killed themselves who was doing the forum stuff on accident, because he got like a CO2 canister and asphyxiated himself trying to like increase his CO2 retention. Those are not the problem. Like young people who are healthy are not healthy because they're going around and doing Buteyko breathing, right? Like they just have normal respiration. They don't have to think about it either. And you don't have to either. This stuff can be therapeutic for you in the moment. And like I said, like bag breathing is like an acute treatment for like anxiety and panic attacks, because those are actually also problems that are related to CO2 levels in your body and oxygen levels in your body. And for those of you that don't know, real quick, like, explanation, oxygen and CO2 displace each other is called the Bohr effect. It's our body uses this principle to facilitate respiration. So when you have shallow breathing is an adaptation to insufficient CO2 production by your body, because we need CO2 in order to push. Okay, so you breathe in oxygen. Hemoglobin on red blood cells captures that oxygen, transports it through your bloodstream to tissues. CO2 being exhaled from our cells pushes that oxygen off of the hemoglobin, and that oxygen then goes into those tissues, while that CO2 is then transported out of the body through the lungs. So CO2 is often discussed as a byproduct or exhaust, or like a waste gas, but it's so wrong. It's not how it works. CO2 is equally as important as oxygen. The majority of CO2 on our body comes from cellular oxidation of nutrient substrate, like carbohydrate, but also fat and protein. Mostly it's carbohydrate. So when you have a deficiency in metabolic rate, your tissues produce less CO2. So then there's not enough CO2 to maintain respiration. Actually, I made quite a considerable scientific achievement in uncovering this other pathway. There's an article on my website I talk about it. I also talk about it in my book in the chapter on GABA therapy. CO2 is also required by our body to maintain pH balance. CO2 naturally dissociates into bicarbonate and carbonic acid in an aqueous medium, and they either like they balance each other out actually. So like when CO2 first hits an aqueous medium, it forms carbonic acid. But when that gets too acidic, it naturally dissociates into, I don't know if dissociates is the right word, but you get what I mean, into bicarbonate. And if there's too much bicarbonate, it also conversely converts into carbonic acid. This happens naturally without any enzyme activity in our bodies and in nature. But we also have an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase that actually facilitates more rapid formation of either carbonic acid or bicarbonate. So CO2 is really, really important for the proper pH balance of our body. But respiration is more important. So if you're not making enough CO2 to support both respiration and pH balance, yeah, throat's starting to get really dry. So if you're not if your cells are not respirating properly to produce enough CO2 to support both respiration and pH balance, because respiration is more important, the body will preferentially use that CO2 for respiration and then not be able to use CO2 for pH. Then in that case, it recruits phosphate and calcium and other ions like that to help balance pH, and that causes hyperphosphatemia. This is something that I uncovered in my own work. It's not like you can find support for it in studies like I did, like I pieced it together through other studies, but it's not like a focus of any papers that are out there. But anyway, so in your case, wait, who asked this? Lou? Yeah, Lou. In your case, Lou, your shallow breathing is because your tissues are not producing enough CO2 to even support robust respiration. So then what happens when you're not producing enough CO2 to perform these functions? Your body instinctively shallow breathes in order to preserve CO2 content, to raise the CO2 content of your body by reducing its ventilation. It's unconscious. That's why, and this is actually also related to sleep apnea. If any of you have sleep apnea, or if you don't now, you probably will when you get older. Sleep apnea is a condition where you produce so little CO2 that you unconsciously will even stop breathing and holding your breath. And this happens at night when you're sleeping. And so you hold your breath actually, and you start to suffocate. And so then it shocks you awake, and you wake up in an alarmed and disoriented, and it's really scary. I had this like 5 or 6 years ago now like 7 years ago when I had cancer. I would just wake up in a panic and like struggling to breathe, and it was really terrible and scary. And so anyway, so your metabolic rate has declined so much that you unconsciously shallow breathe in order to reduce ventilation of CO2, so that you can maintain respiration and probably some pH function still too. And doing the Buteyko breathing can help a little bit by intaking more oxygen and increasing your cellular respiration by supplying more oxygen. But that's why it also doesn't work long term to resolve these problems, is because it doesn't address the underlying issues, which is metabolic insufficiency, a low metabolic rate. And then that in turn is caused either by dieting, insufficient intake of glucose and other carbohydrate. It also can be caused by sunlight deficiency, which reduces metabolic rate, like I talked about earlier in the stream. And here we come around full circle to these pathways being related to each other, where torporific hormones, serotonin and melatonin, inhibit the metabolic rate. Niacinamide can help increase your respiration rate. But one of the most important substrates for this actually is oleic acid, which is what you find in oils like olive oil. But you can also get it in high oleic sunflower oil, not normal regular sunflower oil. It has to be high oleic sunflower oil. Or nuts that are high in oleic acid, like hazelnuts or macadamia nuts. Macadamia nuts are the highest source, actually. Oleic acid is required to stabilize the mitochondrial enzyme that produces energy and CO2, which is called cytochrome. Oleic acid stabilizes that enzyme so that it does not denature very rapidly. So that allows our body to use and reuse cytochrome enzymes over and over again before they break down. When you have an oleic acid deficiency, your cytochrome is not as stable, and so it doesn't produce as much energy. This can actually be really, really, really noticeable if you take a supplement of thiamine. Don't use the hydrochloride form of thiamine, actually, though. Or thiamine mononitrate. You don't want to use thiamine mononitrate. Thiamine mononitrate is actually added to refined flours. And that causes nitrate excess, and nitrate excess can be toxic for our body, actually. So a little bit can be helpful, but usually it's too much. Because thiamine is required as a cofactor for carbohydrate metabolism. So if you combine, if you take some thiamine and carbohydrate and oleic acid together and get sunshine, you can actually stimulate so much CO2 production from your cells that you start to have to breathe a lot. Like you actually become really cognizant of your breathing, and it feels like you're not able to breathe enough because you have too much CO2 production. That's actually not dangerous for our body, though, because CO2 is actually really, really protective of mitochondria and cellular function. And all you have to do when that happens is just breathe like normally. Usually the problem is that your body is so used to shallow breathing and restricting your breathing that the increase in CO2, while still shallow breathing, causes it to rise precipitously in your body. And remember, because CO2 and oxygen displace each other, when you have too much CO2, it displaces oxygen too much. So then you have a hard time getting oxygen into your body. So then all you need to do is just breathe deeply when that happens. But yeah, so you just need to restore your cellular respiration through factors. And this is actually why people on these forums do not know how to fix this, is because nobody knew that oleic acid was a factor in the respiration rate of cells related to cytochrome function. And there's a lot of advice in those forums about things like coconut oil, which is really low in oleic acid, actually. Dairy has a pretty good amount of oleic acid, but you would have to eat a lot of butter to get enough of your daily supply. This is actually why, I mentioned this fact, and I found this on Wikipedia during my research, but the Celts used to believe that hazelnuts imparted wisdom, actually. One of the reasons, and the reason though, is it actually does. Because hazelnuts are high in vitamin E and oleic acid, they facilitate high cellular respiration, and in your brain that actually increases cognitive capacity. And this is one of the factors, like I mentioned earlier, like you don't need to induce quinolinic acid and kynurenine pathway dysfunction to get smart. Like you just need to eat lots of vitamin E and oleic acid and vitamin C and other nutrients that increase respiration rate. And so having a diet that's has plenty of oleic acid, plenty of sunshine, plenty of vitamin C, plenty of carbohydrate, those are like and there's more to it, and all this is talked about in my book, but especially in the chapter on GABA therapy. Raising your respiration rate through rehabilitating your metabolic system like that is how you do that long term. And sorry, I've been talking about this one topic for a long time, but it's actually really, really important, because cellular respiration is one of the most fundamental factors in metabolic health. Low metabolic respiration means disease, and high metabolic respiration means wellness generally. So yeah. It's very relevant for cancer and libido and insomnia and all those other, and a lot of those things. So yeah. Okay. Atticus, what do I think about high quality mushroom extract supplements? Mushrooms have a lot of nutrients in them, actually, and they can be good. They tend to be really expensive, so I have not focused on them as a solution. Eating mushrooms is really good for you. And when I was first trying to get better, I dabbled in mushroom use, but none of it was profound enough to really catch my attention. And it's because mushrooms are not unique. Like a lot of the nutrients that you can find in mushrooms are in other foods. They're not special in the sense, a lot of people think that they're really special because mushrooms will contain like specific phytochemicals that can have various effects, but I just haven't found any that are obviously more useful than say like getting oleic acid in sunlight, you know. Those are like major things. Like most people's problem is that they are not getting enough sunshine every day, and like and stuff like mushrooms or supplements too are not going to do that. I constantly have to tell people who sign up for coaching with me to stop focusing on supplements. Like your problem is not that you haven't found the right supplement to take. Your problem is that you are not eating enough foods with vitamin K, or that you're not eating enough foods with vitamin E, or that you have a sugar deficiency, or that you're not getting enough sunshine. Those are so important for our health, and and conversely, related, they're so effective in helping us to fix health problems, because they're so important for our physiology. So anyway, I would love it if like if like a mushroom shiitakes are like, I think they're really high in like vitamin B5, I think it is. And so like shiitakes are like really good for that kind of thing. But then again, they're also really expensive. So I don't really like recommend them, but yes, mushrooms are really good and you can use them to help your health. I would probably maybe go for eating them culinarily though, and not maybe just the extract. So for hair loss, I'd recommend sunlight, preventing sulfur, sugar, saturated fat. I already have the book, but there's a lot of stuff to remember. Yeah. And also like, things like anthocyanins actually are really relevant to hair loss actually, because dietary anthocyanin actually supports peripheral blood flow. When you have a deficiency of anthocyanin, the reverse happens. Your peripheral blood flow gets actually reduced. Because this is one of the other rate limiting environmental factors that are relevant to our evolutionary biology. Berries are only available when it's summertime and warm out, and there's there's adequate moisture and sunlight for plants to grow. So our body has evolved to work on cues like that in our diet. And so if you don't have berries and other foods that have anthocyanin in your diet, your peripheral blood flow drops. So there's things like that you have to read the book to know about. Like I can't just summarize. Is that the right word? I can't just summarize everything relevant for hair loss, but basically it's eating really good fat, source of protein. Riboflavin is important in there. Most people and what happens is when you activate the kynurenine pathway, you actually get a niacin tingle. It's actually one of the cues you can use to figure out if you're doing the practice properly. If you've ever taken niacin as a supplement, you might be familiar with the niacin flush that happens. And if you take too much, it can actually be really uncomfortable. It can actually hurt so bad that it feels dangerous, but I don't think it is actually dangerous. It just like hurts really bad. But our body does that endogenously. Like when you stimulate effective kynurenine pathway activity in your body, you get like the niacin tingle. I think men are predisposed to feel it more acutely though, because interestingly, and this is also another of my accomplishments, not something that's like, generally even known about in the medical industries. Niacin actually, in the presence of testosterone, niacin actually decreases forearm strength. And that's actually the biological mechanism by which men have the sexually dimorphic characteristic of larger forearms. The way that our body facilitates that is actually by decreasing forearm strength, so that forces the muscles to get bigger in order to actually have strength. That is a function of niacin and testosterone. And I found this out because I was a long time ago in my research, I was like looking up studies on niacin, and there was a study that showed that that men supplementing niacin had reduced forearm strength. And this is actually how our body facilitates the dimorphic sexual dimorphism where men have larger forearms is because niacin, in the presence of testosterone, niacin actually reduces the strength of the forearms. But anyway, so when you induce niacin, endogenous niacin synthesis, I'm saying this because I don't know if women can feel this because I'm obviously not female. But when you're male, or if you're if you're a trans male, you'll feel the tingling in your forearms, especially if you are successful in inducing the kynurenine pathway. It's not very strong. It's very subtle. Actually, a better indicator that's more reliable is an increase in blood flow to your fingers and toes, and so they'll get redder, and your body temperature will increase as well. Those are easier to diagnose, but for me, the kynurenine pathway tingle is actually like really obvious, and you also don't have to also be doing this practice to induce it. There will be times that I'll just be like sitting at my desk and I'll feel niacin, the kynurenine pathway actually start. And the reason for that is when you go in between meals, your body releases amino acids and sugars to keep your body going. It releases some tryptophan from tissue storage and is catabolizing that because of your generally high metabolic rate and good diet. Will just generally support the kynurenine pathway. But you can do it manually through the directives in my book in the chapter on niacin therapy in order to actually promote hair regrowth and higher metabolic rate and that stuff. So, yeah. So that's why it's really complicated, but those are the basic tenets of it: is good fats, sugar, B vitamins, protein, and sunlight. Yeah. But if you're specifically trying to also regrow your hair, you have to do it in a certain order to be really, really good at, like, have it be very, very effective. And there's like a whole direction in my book about that. Any tips to deal with social anxiety? Yeah, actually, so you've been gaming your whole life and love playing music and being creative. Yeah. So, you feel like you don't fit in this world, especially in terms of having to look for regular jobs. Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, so Todd, yes. So, okay. So, and actually somebody, I think it was Jorg last time, also asked me about getting relationships if you don't feel very confident. And I was trying to answer that question while I was playing Subnautica and it wasn't very productive. So, but okay. So Todd, a couple things. It's not just eating a good diet is not the answer to those problems. There is a psychological aspect to it, but first I will talk about the endocrinological aspect to it. Social anxiety is very specifically a symptom of low pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the master hormone of our body. And when you're deficient in pregnenolone, you actually express higher stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. So, for instance, if you are, say, invited to a party, and it's getting on time when you're starting to go, somebody who has a healthy endocrine system and plenty of pregnenolone will just feel excited and happy to be going. But somebody who's deficient in pregnenolone will actually experience higher adrenaline and cortisol at the onset, at the stimulus of the situation, which is anticipating going to a party. So you'll actually start to feel anxious and irritable at the prospect of going, and it can be so bad that we don't do those things. Like when I used to have this, I would avoid social engagements because the anxiety and stress of it was so overwhelming and I couldn't handle it. But the reason it's not so much mental, it's mostly endocrinological. That's why it's really hard to overcome. That's one of the reasons why, like, psychotherapy doesn't often work for these kinds of issues, although it can, but not very well, is because it's hormonal. It's because your endocrine system is not supplied adequately with pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is made from dietary fat, dietary carbohydrate, dietary protein, and vitamin A, or carotenes and zinc and B vitamins. And so a bad diet can very, very much promote pregnenolone deficiency, but sunlight deficiency does as well. It's one of the reasons why, like metaphorically living or literally living in your parents' basement, not getting enough sunshine during the day can actually promote these problems is because sun exposure um, promotes healthy steroidogenesis, whereas sun deficiency promotes torpor, which inhibits steroidogenesis. So, and there was somebody I was coaching a long time ago actually literally did live in their parents' basement, but they lived in like a wooded region of a countryside. And I was like, go out and open and start just gardening outside your house. Like your mom would probably love to garden with you. Like go start a garden. I know it's hard to get outside. Like if you don't have something to do outside, it can be really boring. It can feel unproductive. But like, so I was like, you need to have a healthy diet anyway. Like just go outside and start gardening. I know you don't know how, but like teach yourself. It's really easy. It's actually really fun and rewarding to do when you are successful. And then that's an excuse to get outside. Go get a dog. So you have to take your dog on a walk, every day. Don't do that. Literally don't do that if you can't, though. Like, getting a pet is a very you need to be responsible and have, the resources to do that. But if you do have the space for a pet, like having a dog, like can get you out going for a walk. Or just go for a walk, but being outside, having sun exposure raises your metabolic rate, which in turn benefits your endocrine system. But you then also need adequate carbohydrate, protein, and vitamin carotenes and zinc to make pregnenolone in the first place. So diet is really, really important. And when you start having social anxiety, it's a symptom that your diet and environment has been insufficient for a long period of time. So, but you can also supplement pregnenolone actually. So if you have that problem, what I want you to do is get some pregnenolone. They're usually well made. You can get them anywhere. I would recommend getting notable brands. Don't get these indie brands that are on websites. They're often counterfeit and poor quality. Don't do that. Buy from reputable brands. Avoid silica in supplements. Get a pregnenolone supplement. Take it generally. Like if you have symptoms, another really obvious symptom of pregnenolone deficiency is if at the end of the day, especially if you haven't been doing anything very physically challenging, you feel very fatigued. That is a big symptom of pregnenolone deficiency because we need pregnenolone to help us, our metabolism to run properly. And when it doesn't, we have high stress hormones that deplete you of your energy. So if you feel fatigued at the end of a day, that is also a very strong symptom of pregnenolone deficiency. In that case, taking like 25 to 50 milligrams of pregnenolone every day in the morning can really help with that. But also on top of that, when you have social anxiety, take like 200 to 300 milligrams of pregnenolone in one dose. And if it's like before an event, take it several hours before. And it will get rid of your social anxiety. It's fantastic stuff. If you're hurting your body in lots of other ways by using a lot of alcohol or starving yourself, it's not going to work. But if you're taking care of your body and eating a good diet, and especially if you're getting sunshine, it will literally just get rid of your social anxiety. It's really, really great. Your other question about not fitting into this world and having problems like that are, that's a really big universal theme for a lot of people right now, especially young people. Like we have a lot of we have to contend with toxic chemicals and climate catastrophe and economic problems and the housing shortages and rent going up. It's really stressful. But every generation has had their challenges. Other generations had to go through World War II and the Holocaust. And, before that was like colonization by white European centric cultures. Like more closer to home, like the baby boomer generation had to go through threat of nuclear holocaust as children, and like they had to do drills where they hid under their desk and were told they were going to be immolated by a nuclear bomb at any minute, every single day of their lives. What you're talking about is trauma, and trauma is usually dealt with in our communities and societies and systems by trying to ignore it. And that doesn't work because trauma is in the subconscious, and ignoring problems is a conscious act. And you cannot resolve trauma by ignoring it. You have to resolve trauma by addressing it. Therapy can sometimes do that, but it usually fails. I talk about this in my book, The Perfect Child. The therapy is in both of my books, but the my book, The Perfect Child, more directly talks about childhood trauma and how to prevent and to resolve it. And the trauma therapy in there is much more extensive. It's also in Fuck Portion Control in the chapter on God and spirituality. Um, a lot of the insecurities and lack of confidence. Okay, so I was extremely insecure, and also, mind you, I'm 6'7", so I am not like a small person. I cannot hide in crowds. Every time I would walk into a room, people would look at me, and I was just really shy and really insecure, and I couldn't hide from people. And so I tried to pretend to be confident. So at one point I realized, like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to, like, hide from all this. So I started, like, trying to stand upright and pretend like I was confident, but inside I really wasn't confident. And a lot of the trauma that I went through as a kid was preventing me from finding the satisfaction in my life that I wanted. Um, and in ways that I could not possibly be conscious about, even if I tried, even if I did lots of extensive therapy, psychotherapy. There are control and coping mechanisms that we acquire from our experiences as children that your conscious brain cannot be conscious of. They are ways that we perceive the world. For instance, Todd, you said you don't fit into this world, but, like, why? Like, really, like, what is preventing you from going out and being this Chad of a stud that just, like, loves people and loves having fun and is accomplished and is a go-getter and makes lots of money? Like, the only thing that is preventing you from doing that is actually your perception of yourself, not reality. Let's imagine this world where, like, you could just push a button and wipe out your personality and get a new one and start over. Nothing physically would really change. Like, nothing actually would change. There's nothing different. The only thing that would be different is your perception, your perception of yourself and your perception of the world around you. And that is a product of, oh, thanks. That's nice of you to say. So that is a product of your childhood experience and the trauma that you went through specifically as a child that shaped your view of yourself and the world around you. And I'm saying this as a gay man that grew up in an abusive, conservative family and community. I tried to kill myself. I did not want to live. I did not think I had any value in my life. I did not think that anyone loved me. And guess what? I still don't have a relationship with my family. They are still homophobic. They are still not accepting, but I am the only person in my family that's actually happy. I don't have a lot in my life. I am not a big success. There's like only 10 people in here right now. I do not have a lot of money. But I wake up every morning. I used to wake up and it did not matter how bad of a dream I was having. It was preferable than waking up. I did not want to wake up and face the day. Every time I would wake up, I would sigh and just be so upset that I was awake. And now I wake up, I love mornings and I cannot wait to wake up every day. I don't have anything in my life, and yet I am more satisfied and fulfilled than I've ever been in my life. And it is not because I accomplished anything that I set out to accomplish. And it's not because I changed or I got better or I got more fit or I got better looking or anything that we try to use to accomplish these things. It is only because I was able to address my childhood trauma that was causing me to perceive myself and life in the way that I was. And I did that through the compassionate process of the inventory therapy that I talk about in Fuck Portion Control in the chapter on God and spirituality and the entirety of The Perfect Child. Because those therapies teach you how to have compassion for yourself. They teach you how to feel and understand that it is okay that you have gone through the things that you've gone through and that life is hard and that things don't work out the way that you want. To actually accept those things, not to just pretend that they're going to be better or that or that life will get different. Most of us try to delude ourselves into, when we feel hopeless, we try to delude ourselves that the future is going to be better and things are going to work out. Well, what if they don't? What are you going to do if they don't? What then? We usually do not have the tools to handle life as it is. We were not empowered as children because our parents did not have these tools to give to us either. We were not empowered as children to handle those realities. What do you do when things go bad? What do you do when stuff is horrible? Because very many times in our life, stuff does go bad and stuff is horrible, and life can be really difficult. What do you do then? Well, most of us don't have those tools. And I learned them from my personal experience, and then I wrote and I developed these therapies to work to be more effective, because I recognized the psychotherapy aspect of them, and then exploited that. And those therapies can help you find the kind of confidence that you want, which doesn't rely on things happening. It comes from your inherent self-worth, which you can find from doing that kind of introspective therapy. And it's really, really effective if you'll do it. Most people don't like doing it because our control and coping mechanisms help us to feel safe. And they can be really difficult to address. But if you are willing to, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad to help. But if you practice that, you can teach yourself those skills. You don't. This was one of the conundrums, actually, Todd, that I experienced personally when I started this process. I was an alcoholic. My relationship had just imploded. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a place to live. And I was like 35. I was like, what the fuck? I'm like a 35-year-old white male. I should have at least one of these things. I should have at least a car or a boyfriend or a house or some money or a job. And I didn't have any of them. And I realized that I did not know how to live life. Like, I did not have effective skills to be successful in my life. And then I got into AA, and I was like, and I thought that, and it did help. It helped me get sober and get some perspective, and it taught me the foundation, a lot of these things. And I thought that was going to be the answer too. But a lot of the people in AA were also fucking crazy. They were mean and exploitative. They were just as fucked up as I was, because they have the same kinds of trauma and chemical dependence that I did. And so I got really hopeless. I was like, where am I going to learn these skills? I can't find anybody to teach me the things that I want to learn. My parents can't teach me. My parents couldn't teach me. The religion that I was raised in didn't teach me. My siblings couldn't teach me. They're all traumatized too. Most of my friends in my generation are traumatized. It just didn't seem, and I had read so many self-help books and other things like that too. It just did not seem that like anybody had these skills that I really wanted to learn. And when I started but when I started doing the therapies that I talk about in my book, I realized that I can teach myself these skills. I can teach myself how to like myself. I can teach myself how to be satisfied with my life. I can teach myself how to handle unpleasant experiences using those therapies. And it did. And my life has been fantastic ever since. And so that's why I try to teach other people those things and stuff. And yeah. Okay, so I'll finish up a few. It's been 2 hours. I'll finish up a few questions and then I'll end. Yeah, cognitive therapy is kind of like this, and other people also compare my therapy to like journaling, because it is a writing practice, and it's one of the reasons why journaling and cognitive therapy can help, is because the actual action of doing can facilitate some change. But the inventory therapy very specifically walks you through each of your individual experiences of trauma, and thereby helps you to resolve it. Because when you do cognitive therapy or journaling, it's not very targeted, and not very structured. It's still a little bit ambivalent and unguided. The inventory therapy works because it very specifically helps you untangle every single experience of trauma that you've had, and that resolves it. So it's a lot like cognitive therapy or journaling, but it's just much more targeted and specific. No, well, so you can get pregnenolone through diet. If you for instance were to consume a spoonful of coconut oil, and you have a regular supply of zinc and carotene, your body will make pregnenolone. Actually, your body can make so much pregnenolone that it can actually cause a vitamin A deficiency. Actually, vitamin A, our body tears through vitamin A more quickly than any of the other fat-soluble vitamins, which is why you need to have daily ample supplies of carotene in your diet, because we need a constant supply of it. When I first was experimenting with coconut oil, I would get erectile dysfunction from using it. And I thought that meant that coconut oil was bad. But what was actually happening was that because coconut oil has lauric acid in it, the high lauric acid content promotes enormous synthesis of pregnenolone that can actually deplete you of vitamin A if you are not eating enough dietary carotene. So once I figured that out, just having like, at least like a few carrots every single day was enough to supply that. And then coconut oil actually promoted erectile function because it was being supported by enough carotene. And when you're metabolically ill too, you have a hard time storing vitamin A because you tear through it so quickly. So you have to get even more. Like a lot of people like we'll have like a sweet potato like 2 or 3 times a week, and we'll be like, oh yeah, well, I've had plenty of carotene. No, like actually, if you're metabolically ill, you should have a piece of carotene food probably with every single meal a day. So like 3 different servings every single day. You need to get up. You need to get a handle on your endocrinological dysfunction, and you can only do that through dietary carotene and zinc. So you can get pregnenolone through diet that way, but also you can also have deficiencies in pregnenolone synthesis pathways because of pathogenic infection. And so if that doesn't help with your social anxiety or improve your libido and your mood and your fatigue, at the end of the day, fatigue is a great symptom for pregnenolone deficiency. So just go ahead and supplement it. It's really good to supplement. It's very effective, and that can help you get you through the tough time. Atticus, your thoughts, any thoughts on why milk, drink A2, makes you feel good and bad at the same time? Yeah. After experimenting for the past few years, it's very nourishing, gives me science problems. Okay. Yes, Atticus, this is actually relevant to my latest work on hydrogen sulfide bacteria. Milk is very nutritious, so it just makes you feel good because there's so much nutrients in it. Milk is also, though, really high in methionine, and the pathogenic hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria that infect us love methionine and cysteine. And milk is also actually kind of low in pyridoxine. I always say this wrong, even though I've been researching this stuff for years. I have to make sure I'm saying that right. Yes. So B6. Milk is actually kind of low in B6. And because B6 and folate as well are needed to metabolize methionine into the transsulfuration pathway. So if you drink a lot of milk and you're not eating a lot of plants or other sources of folate and pyridoxine, you can accumulate methionine. And the reason that milk is like this is because growing young animals need enough methionine to grow. The sulfurous amino acids are really important for growth. And if you say, for instance, were a child and you did not get enough methionine and cysteine in your diet, your growth would be stunted. Doing the opposite, getting enough folate and pyridoxine in your diet can help make milk more nutritious that way. But that would not be enough either, though, to inhibit the hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria. And the reason that you have sinus problems is probably because you're harboring some pathogenic bacteria up in your nasal cavity. So every time that you drink milk, the methionine that is in there is actually supporting them. So you can do methionine and cysteine restriction to try to help yourself get over that. That is not enough to resolve that problem, though. This is what my update coming up is going to talk about, though. So you guys are getting a preview, though, because you're here. Foods that are really high in anthocyanin, like darkly colored berries, blackberries, blueberries, purple grapes, purple grape juice, those anthocyanin oxidizes hydrogen sulfide into sulfite and sulfate. So it's actually really protective of us, and hydrogen sulfide actually inhibits our immune factors. My last update talked all about the innate immune system with the peroxidase enzymes and how iodine and cyanide participate in the innate immune system. This is all discussed in the chapter on viruses and immunity. Hydrogen sulfide inhibits all of it. And so addressing hydrogen sulfide directly is really, really important to mitigating those effects. So you can restrict methionine and cysteine, not in excess. I tend to advise like maybe going like 2 to 3 meals, maybe 4 meals at a time of restriction. No, don't do a lot. You do not want to give yourself a protein deficiency. That can be very stressful. But doing restriction can help, but it's not effective on its own to be permanent. You have to have those other factors in there that help promote the transsulfuration pathway, like foods high in folate and peroxidine. Examples of those are peppers and chickpeas. Those are really high in peroxidine. Most plants, green vegetables, are high in folate. Fruits also will have them. And then anthocyanin is a very powerful dietary staple. So if you start eating a lot of grapes and grape juice, or berries, or raisins are often dark, but like Thompson raisins are made out of green grapes and they don't have anthocyanin. So it has to be purple grape raisins. Those, if you eat a lot of those every day, that can really help bring down your hydrogen sulfide burden. And conversely, it also oxidizes it into sulfate, which is used by our body to promote vitamin D and steroidogenesis and detoxification. So it's doubly good for a lot of different reasons. So good. Yeah. Oh, Mike, roasted bugs like crickets high in bioavailable B12. Yes, they are. They're actually our evolutionary source of B12 is insects. I bought some. I figured after many years of talking about insects being our evolutionary source of B12, I should probably try some. So I bought some cricket powder. And I was so grossed out by even the powder. I couldn't do it. I put it in some I can't remember what I put it in, some milk or some juice. I just take a supplement of B12 and that seems to be plenty. So I didn't really notice like a benefit from having the crickets. Many cultures around the world still consume bugs though, not because they have to, they just never lost their tradition of insect consumption. I just couldn't do it. So, I just rely on oysters in my supplement B12. Anyway, hey guys, thanks so much for hanging out. I tried to play Subnautica last time. I do like gaming and I'm gonna do it, but what I think I'm gonna do is I'm going to do these streams and then I'll stop my stream and then play Subnautica separately, but I'm not going to do that this time. I'm probably in the future when I get a few more viewers. And also streaming at the end of the day, I just get so tired, and so I don't want to I don't feel like going on. But so I'll do that in the future. But for now, this is going to be the end. So I think my next stream will be on Wednesday. When you're here too, or if you're not here and you follow up later, you can let me know what times you'd like me to stream and I'll try to accommodate those. Hey, thanks, Atticus. Love you guys. Thank you so much for coming by, and I hope you have continue having a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.